So at the beginning of this story, I was just this very active mom. I think a lot of women can relate to that. And every Friday, I would travel up to my son's school, and I would like read poems to the class and stories. And my 4-year-old daughter would come with. And this was an interesting day. It was just the last Friday of the school year, and it was a beautiful day. And so we just kind of impromptu decided to stay for recess. And my son disappeared behind the school just in search of anything that like hopped, buzzed, or crawled. And my daughter was getting pushed on a swing. And I had suggested a game of tag to some kids that were kind of hanging on me. And before I knew it, we were just like whirling about the playground. Now, unbeknownst to me, at the same time, we were engaged in this game of tag. There was a boy who was climbing a very large play structure full of tubes and slides, and he makes his way through the tubes, and he makes his way all the way up to the top of the play structure. And instead of going down one of the slide options, he had another idea. He decided to climb over the protective barrier while I was running right by. He jumped and landed on my head.
Oh,
And yeah, and my neck cracked.
oh,
And we fell together, actually, kind of entangled together, and his elbow shattered. And I was just completely immobile in the wood chips, paralyzed from the neck down.
what did you do at that point? Like it happened so fast.
It did. It happened very fast. And I just remember I'm in the wood chips, I'm on my back. I didn't lose consciousness. And so, but I knew right away, like I could not move at all. And I could hear a little girl like kind of screaming for the boy to get off of me. And I started to feel like this crowd of children press around me. A teacher came, and soon she was kneeling by my side. And it was not a Christian school, but there were a lot of Christians in the school. And so like immediately she started to pray for me. And I was praying too. I mean, I'm thinking, Lord, please do not let me be paralyzed. And meanwhile, like kids start to like, press. And I think pretty soon the teachers realized like, okay, she's not getting up, like something terrible. This is terrible. And so they kind of blew the whistles, and kids were ushered into the school, including my kids. And someone held a phone to my ear so that I could call my husband. He showed up at the playground. He has this very like calming personality. So he kneels down by me, and we talk for just a second, and then he goes and he finds my kids and prays with them. And meanwhile, an ambulance shows up, and a paramedic kneels down by my side, and he starts to ask me questions, and then I kind of like see my arm suspended in the air, and that's a shock because I haven't done that. And then he lets go of my arm, and I just kind of watch it flop unnaturally, and he catches it like right before it hits the wood chips. Then it's just decided, we're going to carefully transport her, and they put me in the ambulance. And while I'm in the ambulance, they cut my clothes, and I get to the hospital where I'm just, flooded by nurses and doctors, and I'm flipped and prodded and poked. And I didn't really, I wouldn't say I felt nothing, but I felt was like this immense pressure on my body. I felt like I was like pinned beneath the weight of an elephant, is how I can describe it. So I couldn't move because I felt this immense pressure. The emergency room doctor sent me for an MRI, and I spent the hour in that enclosed tube just praying. And I was pretty calm actually in the moment. I just remember praying persistently, just thinking things like, Lord, like I want to braid my daughter's hair. I had a 4-year-old at that time. My daughter was 4 and my son was 7. I'm just thinking, Lord, I want to hug my kids. Please, Lord, just let this cup pass from me. And so I come out of the MRI. My husband and I were football fans, and so he's in his mind thinking this is kind of like a stinger. If you've ever watched a football game, you'll see sometimes like a football player take a hit, and if they get hit in such a way, similarly where their cord gets pressed a little bit. And then after a little bit, usually, it just kind of subsides and, everyone applauds. And it's a great moment when that happens. But when the ER doctor came back into the room, we just immediately perceived from his expression, this is not a stinger. And he explained that my spinal cord had been lacerated and crushed, and that they were looking for, he said, a surgeon who was willing and able to perform the operation. My injury is really high. It's right at 3 and 4. So really similar to, if you ever remember Christopher Reeve, who is the actor who played Superman. Some of our younger listeners might not know who that is, but I mean, for us, he was just this symbol of strength, and he had an injury at between 2 and 3, I believe. And so when the surgeon got there, he said, "You have suffered a Christopher Reeve-level injury." So right away, that's not something that either of us wanted to hear. I wasn't on a ventilator at the time, but he explained that he was going to need to put me on a ventilator. He was going to need to go in and remove all of the broken fragments and then put it back together in terms of like using donor bone and some metal hardware. And so when I went into surgery, he basically told my family, like, I'm hopeful that she's going to come off the ventilator. Beyond that, hope was discouraged. So yeah, it was a pretty grim prognosis. But we know that we're all the time, obviously in our Christian faith, we're called to these moments where we're called to wonder and actually live into, do I believe this or not? And do I believe that the Lord can heal? And I do. That doesn't mean he always heals at the time or in the way that we want, but I know that he can. And so we are living kind of in a rebellious hope that even though the doctors say, even after I came out of the surgery and they say, okay, so she's not ever going to walk again. I mean, at this point, I'm completely paralyzed from the neck down. He just discouraged any kind of hope.
Now, you come out and you hear this.
Mm-hmm.
What are you thinking now?
I'm in an immense amount of pain when I come out. We all come to sometimes like these moments in our lives where almost like time is categorized by them. Like you can even think like, oh, this was before the injury or this was after the injury. And so we're all realizing we're in this moment where life has altered. I think that we really were living in a place of knowing that the Lord calls us to suffering. We had been in a great church when we lived in Texas. That church preached a lot on suffering. You're going to suffer. I wasn't necessarily shocked that something terrible had happened. We were in a place of real grief, grief for just, what's been lost, grief for like hopes and dreams that you have for what you're hoping your life will look like. And so I do think that that's actually the faithful response to loss. I think grief is exactly what the Lord calls us to in those moments. And so we were in this real tension of like hope and grief.
What was your faith in this, your recovery to this? Were you thinking, will God heal this? Will I be okay? And share that moment when you knew that the Lord was really with you.
Throughout, I really had so many moments where I knew that the Lord was with me. First, I was in the hospital where I had the surgery. And then a week after that, I was transferred to a rehabilitation hospital that specialized in spinal cord injuries. So when I was transferred there, I was with people who had been there longer, obviously, than me, who were not making progress. I think I was very much still living in the reality of the pain, but also in the space of, but I know that what seems impossible to doctors, it's not impossible to our God. He's the great physician. And also living into that place of like, and even if he doesn't, he's still good. Like trying to say true things and make true confessions, even when you're in that, I believe, Lord, help my unbelief. I think that
Mhm.
was,
Mhm.
I think that probably best describes where I was. Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. Started therapy there. The Lord was kind. I had this one overnight nurse. She would come in because I had to be turned every 3 hours to prevent, blood clots and bed sores. And so she would pray with me, and I had other nurses, and I learned stories. It's so you're in a vulnerable place, and when you're vulnerable, I think they tend to be more vulnerable as well. And so I
Mhm.
learned lots of stories and felt like I had God moments, even with like nurses and doctors and other patients, with therapists. It's so many therapists. I didn't have a pick up your mat and walk moment. It wasn't like one day I came in and I was able to hop out of bed. What instead God did for me is that I got little pieces back at a time.
Mhm.
So like at first, I was able to move my left foot, and I just remember moving it constantly. It was just this like little piece of normal that I was clinging to. And then slowly we would just see teeny improvements. It was sweet. I remember my husband would come at the end of the day after he kind of put our kids to bed. He'd come back and he would read like our care pages, things that people had posted, and then he'd
Oh.
brush my teeth. He'd brush my teeth for me, and he'd kiss me, and he'd say, like, tomorrow I want you to get a little bit better.
Mhm.
And the Lord was kind in that I got a little bit better each day, it felt like. And, it was an incredible thing to experience, because even though I'm starting over completely, I mean, completely, I'm learning how to crawl and hold like a spoon and things like that. I was diagnosed, I don't think I said this, I was diagnosed a quadriplegic. So it was a serious diagnosis. I was with therapists, and at first I remember my therapist being like, okay, like try to squeeze this, and nothing, like I can't move anything. And then
Mhm.
fast forward a few weeks, and she would say, try to squeeze this. And there was like something. And she at the end said, I wish that I would have recorded this, because it truly was like we were just experiencing a miracle. It was something to behold.
At what point did you go home?
And so interestingly, my insurance would only let me stay for 30 days in patient. And then because I had started to make progress, the doctors actually scholarshiped me 10 additional days just so I could get additional therapy. And so I went home after the rehab hospital 40 days after I had been there. But I had to come back 5 days a week. So I was, someone drove me, and I continued to do therapy for hours, and still continued to do that for another year. And even now, I do physical therapy. I try and do at least a round of it every year so that I don't kind of go backwards. God gave me back so much, but I was raised wounded, and I think a lot of people can relate to that in the sense that I can walk. I can do most things, but I do I have a lot of limitations in the sense of everything technically from the neck down is still broken. So I have kind of a long laundry list of things in terms of, chronic nerve pain and muscle issues. My hands kind of feel like they're dead. And so I don't have a lot of feedback, so I'll like drop and spill. When I've looked to Jesus, I find a lot of comfort in the sense that his wounds that he was raised with speak to, I think, the wounds that we are also sometimes raised with. His healing, comes in certain ways that, in the similar way to when I was saying I lived with that grief, I think now I'm at this point where I live with a tremendous heart of gratitude. And also you kind of hold the grief for things like that you can't do, run or just like the life that once had. But again, make no mistake, I'm very thankful. If the doctors were right, I wouldn't have been able to do anything.
What a great story. I mean, not a good story in the fact that you are in the position you are, but I think your
Yeah.
heart for the Lord is just so commendable. Thank you for
Mhm.
sharing all of that. That is great. And so I'm sure your family is helping you now as you begin your progress forward. What year did this happen?
So it was yesterday was the 15-year anniversary.
Okay,
So
so you've been going through this for a
2009.
long time.
I think my husband would say it's this wonderful, horrible story.
Yeah, yeah. Aw.
But yes, we have journeyed together for quite a while in it. But yesterday, I'm obviously thinking of all of the people, was praying for some of the people that cared so very well for me during those dark days, and I was, yeah, just thinking about what a different life it would have been had the doctors been right. My surgeon is great too because he had heard a rumor that I was on my feet, and he was kind of incredulous about it because he had seen, I guess, the inside of, he'd seen all of the interior. And so he was just like, really? So he made the trek to the rehab hospital, where at this time I was using kind of like this high walker. And it was not in any sense like pretty walking, but I was on my feet with two therapists, one on each side. And he saw me in the hallway, and he was kind of just in shock. And I said to him, "Hey, you did good work." And he just shook his head and he just said, "I can take no credit."
Aw.
And then he pointed up and he was just like, God did this. So that was also an amazing moment just to see him recognize, and yeah, for his unique position in being the doctor who did the surgery, and just probably felt he was a realist. And so I kind of like that. He kind of told it like it was, he
Yeah.
said, this is bad. This is really bad. And he had actually admitted I've never done a surgery this high before. So I think he was a little on his heels. But yeah, it was great just to hear him.
So, how does your book, Where I End, offer hope to those facing suffering?
So I wrote the book really as just a response to the amazing story that God had written. When my husband started, he's a professor, and when he first started his job, he was traveling into the city with a friend, and he knew that they were going to ask him questions about, his life and who he was since he was new. And he said, I'm not sure if I'm going to share the story. And his friend said, "You have to share the story. It's the only faithful response to living the story." And so I wrote the story down. And then it's a lot of just kind of short reflections on things like grief and hope. My hope and desire is that it would just really shine a light on who Jesus is to us in our suffering. Not only, which is just an amazing thing, that he suffers with us and that he understands to the depths of our being what we're carrying and what we're going through, but also that he has the power to overcome. It is a story of God's just light in the darkness. And I think that it can really resonate with people in all different places of grief. I had someone post something for me once where she said she had lost her son, and just how the book had been just a lifeline of just true things said to her. That was so very humbling and encouraging to me. But that's my desire, to know Jesus, to know him intimately in those places of life when, the bottom has really fallen out.
Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts on our conversation by putting your comments below and visit the call with NancySabato.com to learn more about me and what we do here on the ministry. Don't forget to like and subscribe and share. Your support means so much to us.